So my name is Scott Colettis, Senior Specialist within the OR group. And this afternoon, we're going to be going over reviewing this documentation portion of the nurse desktop, followed by the billing maintenance desktop. Now, when going over the documentation, I'm not going to go too much into any of the integration points, things like pharmacy, materials management, items, because those are all separate topics for tomorrow. So let me go into my nurse desktop. I need to launch it and find my patient that I was working on. Actually, should mention, if you have any questions at any point in time, feel free to either use the Q&A function or the chat function. Either one's fine. I'll be periodically checking them throughout the presentation. Okay. So I'm blocking a couple of things here. Whoops. Got too many random ones open here. There we go. All right. So the documentation of the nurse desktop. So this is pretty much where we're going to be entering any information that happens, anything that happened to the patient within their visit to the whole OR area. So it includes everything that happened prior to them showing up to surgery, through pre-op, through the operative phase, as well as your PACU documentation. So with the documentation, this will encompass many things, such as pretty much what was actually done to the patient. The documentation drives many different things, such as your charging, what you can charge the patient. It'll also drive your statistics, as well as it'll drive your materials management information, what items will need to be reordered. So a lot of things happen based upon what you actually document. So I'm going to first go through pre-op section. I'm actually going to primarily focus on the operative section because that has the most documentation, and each section of the record has a lot of the same fields, just tailored to that particular area. So first I'm going to go into pre-op. I'm defaulting into going to the assessment screens. So in here, assessments, we may have a number of options depending on what you have set up. This can be used to document things that happen prior to the patient showing up. Maybe do like a preoperative interview. You call them over the phone so you can document what was spoken about within the assessment. So we have settings on here, so it's going to default in what assessment will come into the record based upon the patient type. So if you know you have ones that you're always going to be documenting, you set that up in the customer defined parameters to default in. So we have the OR admission assessment set up to come in. So I'm just going to quickly go into to document this. So we have on here, it's a group assessment. So I'm just going to do a quick documentation. So the assessment is it's controlled 100% by you. It's built within MIS. So if there's anything that you need to capture, you can certainly go ahead and create that within MIS and then make it available within OR. But that's all. The assessments are another topic specifically for tomorrow with integration with PCS. But I just wanted to get something on here just to show you that when we do document the assessment, it'll show when and who documented the information. But going on into the main portion of the record, I'm going to click on preoperative record. And this will bring me into documentation for when the patient's specifically within pre-op. So everything in here, for the most part, is all standard fields with the exception of the customer-defined screens. And the fields that are available will be based upon the access option set that you have created and added to the access group. So with the option sets, once you go through and set them up, you can determine what fields do you actually want to have available to each record section. And that can also vary based upon the type of procedure taking place, which I will show you in a little while. So within my pre-op record, my option set is set up so all these headers, they're all condensed. There are settings within the option set dictionary so that you can, when you go into the record, either have certain sections expanded or everything expanded. So if I click on the plus at the top underneath pre-op record, it'll expand all of my sections below. So first up we have is our times. And just so you know, these headers that say times, nursing diagnosis, invasive procedures, those are all free text, so you can label them whatever you want to. So when you're setting up the option set, you can set them up so you can group similar type of fields together. So like in this section, I have my times all in one area. But when I get to the operative section, I have the record set up a little bit differently. So my fields aren't necessarily grouped together based upon the type of field, but I have them in the operative based upon probably when they would take place during surgery. So I'm going to say what time the patient went into pre-op, what time did they leave. Let's say they're there for 45 minutes. Each section of the record will have nursing diagnosis screens, or you can. And this is actually a lookup into the facility data dictionary to see the CDSs have been flagged as a pre-op nursing diagnosis. You can also have them set up to default in based upon the procedure being performed. So now that I added in, I see that I've added the diagnosis screen, but I have a little red eye next to it indicating that nothing has been documented yet on that screen. So here, this is just a customer-defined screen, so you can certainly add in anything that you want to. So I just want to get something on here documented. So now you see as brought out back out to my main screen, the eye changes to blue to indicate that there is documentation that has been entered on that screen. In each section of the record, there are fields where we can document the invasive procedures that are performed. So if you did an invasive procedure within the pre-op area, you can certainly document that. If you do it within the operative section within the OR, you can certainly do that, as well as our PACU sections, or phase 1, phase 2. This will actually be a lookup into the OR invasive procedure dictionary. So I just document the time of when we did this, who actually performed it. Was it a lookup to either the provider dictionary, was it the surgeon or someone else that performed it, or was it one of your OR pre-op staff? So you have choices of who you want to document who performed it. So the staff will default in. If I go into that field of the person that's documenting, you can certainly change it if it wasn't, if the person that was documenting didn't actually perform the invasive procedure. And I can free text any comments about the invasive procedure that I want to. And I can add as many in that I need to. There isn't a restriction to the number of, it's not restricted to 3 procedures. You just only see 3 lines at a time. I'm not going to go into the medications and intakes because that's a topic specifically for tomorrow with going over the OR pharmacy integration. So skip over that for now. All right. But I will go into the output, so if something comes out of the patient, we can certainly enter that information in. So what time are you documenting this take place? This will be a lookup into our OR output type dictionary. So you just document if there was any output, you can certainly do that. And again, you're not restricted to 3 lines. You'll just keep scrolling indefinitely. Each section of the record will have the ability to document whether there was blood given to the patient. So if there is blood, you can certainly go ahead and enter in the ID number for the blood products. That will be on the package that you receive from your blood bank. And you can also have a customer-defined screen associated to the blood products. So again, I get that little red eye to indicate that there is a screen behind it that hasn't been documented yet. So in here is just the customer-defined screen that we have added to our parameters to appear whenever we document our blood products. So these are all just free text fields for me. So you can, since that's a customer-defined screen, you would be able to control whatever you see on there. Each section of the record has the ability to have standalone customer-defined screens, and each section will have up to 5 of them. So if you find that there isn't a standard field to do your document something, and you don't want to put it on an assessment, you can create the customer-defined screens. So the way I like to think of it, assessments are definitely useful for if you're going to be documenting something multiple times. You'd want to use the assessments. You can do multiple occurrences. Things like your vital signs would definitely be a good one to have as an assessment. So you're going to be documenting multiple occurrences. Where this one, the preoperative CDS, we have pre-procedure check-in, something we're going to be documenting once. There's not really much in here anyways. So I'm going to change my screens around. All right. So when we're documenting the preoperative, once the patient's complete within the area, we want to document where are we going to, where's the patient going to. So here we can say, if they're actually going to surgery, we can say they're going to the operating room. Maybe you decide they're not going to have surgery, you can certainly document the destination of where they're going to if it's not the OR. And then how are they getting there? So these are both linked up to the destination and transfer dictionaries. So if there's any options that you don't see, you can always certainly add them to those dictionaries. As well, there's options that you don't use, you can certainly inactivate them and they won't appear. And in addition, with these destinations and transfer methods, you can set them up to default based upon the procedure being performed. So there's default settings within the procedure dictionary. So I'll point out a couple other areas where you can set them up to default in. And who are you pretty much report given to, who are you handing them off to? So this is a lookup into the user dictionary. So you can certainly see anyone that's in here. So if you're handing them off to someone, they're leaving the operative area and they're going off to the floor or they're going somewhere else, we have the whole user dictionary available for them. And then if we're done with our documentation within the section, we can enter in the completed date and time and by who. So this just gives an indication once we get over to our billing maintenance desktop to indicate that we have completed our portion of the documentation. So I'll point that out later on when we go over the billing maintenance. So here I'll go and enter the date and the time that the documentation was actually completed. What will happen with that, once I enter it into completed date, the system will go through and do a check to make sure if any of my fields I have flagged as being required are missing. And if not, then I'll get a report saying what is missing. So I'll show you that report once I get into the operative section to have a much more options set up as being required there. Excuse me. The last field we have is our notes. So this is, each section of the record will have a big notes field. So this is just a big free text area where we can enter anything that we want to. So just documents, maybe they're just taking note of what happened to the patient, just documenting maybe when you notified the patient's family of the status, just saying that that occurred. So anything that you would need to, you can certainly enter that in. And here there's also the ability to pull in canned text. So there's the canned text dictionary within OR. So if you find that you're documenting the same notes over and over again or something very similar, you can create a canned text to pull that information into the record and then make your modifications. So to invoke to pull in the canned text, I have to invoke the get function, which is done by pressing F5. And then here, to actually do a lookup to the canned text, I would press F9 to pull that in. And here I'm going to say the patient arrived on time at, it came in at 7:55. The nice thing with the canned text, again, set up so the cursor defaults to certain areas. So I defaulted into this area to document the time. And also you can pull in query information. So if there was a query documented, say, you want to pull that data into the canned text, you can certainly do that. So I got that option since nothing had been populating that query. So I'm just going to save this. Now you notice on my notes it tells me the date and the time that it was entered in and by who. All right, so there is a newer enhancement where you do have the ability to undo notes. So if you entered a note by mistake on maybe the wrong patient, or you made a typo, or you just want to remove it, you now have the ability to undo notes. So there's a setting within the OR Access Dictionary to do that. Determines whether or not you can undo notes and undo notes for other people. So here, if I just want to undo this note, I just select it and then I can press undo. Oops, nope. Let me select it again and actually say undo. And then it'll say undo this note, yes. I just have to enter in a reason, which is just free text. And now it will show that the note has been undone. So now it's I think that was supposed to remove it at some point. At least now you notice that it still has the status of undone, so you know it's no longer a valid note. Okay. So next section is the holding room section. So if the patient's going somewhere, maybe the operating room isn't quite available yet, but you need to move the patient out of the preoperative area because maybe another patient's coming in there and you need the bed. We have a section for a holding room, so if you can utilize that if you have that scenario or that situation. And it's just going to look pretty much the same as the pre-op section, where you have your assessments as well. But here you document any sort of the times that they went to the holding area. Again, if there are any medications, you have notes, destinations, and whatnot. So it's a section you can utilize if you do have like a holding area, waiting area for the patient going between pre-op and operative. All right, so I'm going to move on to the operative sections. This is where we'll spend the bulk of the time. This is where the most documentation is entered in. Again, just like our pre-op area, we can have assessments available for the pre-op. So in this ring, we have it set up so our vital signs are actually documented on an assessment. So I'm going to go ahead and say I want to document them. I can enter in the date and the time that we actually took the assessments, the vital signs, I should say. So maybe I have the ability to backdate this. So if we actually did this at 9 o'clock, you can certainly just change the time. It's just going to default to the current time, assuming that you're doing active live documentation. And if we're going to be documenting multiple occurrences of like vital signs of time, or actually any assessment for that matter, you have the option to use the spreadsheet. So if I didn't use spreadsheet, I would then only be able to document one occurrence at a time. Okay. So let me just get something in here. So again, these assessments are totally controlled by you. So whatever you want to document or capture data on, you can certainly go ahead and create an assessment to do all that. Let me see. Let me get one other thing in here. All right. So if we want to do multiple occurrences on here, we can just go ahead and say insert column. Then we can enter in the time that we wanted to say we perform this information. So here we'll just go ahead and add another column. So I have one for 9 o'clock and 9:15. And then I can just copy over each column if I wanted to, or re-enter it in. I can also like just drag and drop individual columns, or I can do the whole by holding my left mouse button, and it will bring everything over to the next column. Then I can also change it if I needed to, if it was no longer accurate. All right. The other nice thing, if you're using the assessments for your vital signs, you do have the ability to integrate with a monitor. So if you did purchase that interface, you can set it up so you can just check this, click this Get Monitor Data, and it'll pull everything from the monitor based upon the criteria that you enter in here. So what date range and time range do I want to enter in, and then based upon that, how often do I want to pull that data in? Do I want to pull it every 2 minutes, every 5 minutes, whatever you decide. But since we don't have anything, we don't have it set up in this ring, I'm going to get this warning saying it's no monitor data available for the time period. But if there was, you just populate everything in, then you'd have the ability to go through, review it, make sure it's correct. And if you needed to, you would be able to make any changes that you need to. So if you got a bad read, you can remove an occurrence. Oh, that might have been the one I wanted to use. Let's see. Actually, yeah, this is the assessment I meant to use, not the other one. Let me just get one thing on here just so I can. Okay. So that first one, I didn't mean to use that one. So I wanted to point out, when you document an assessment that's flagged as being a vital signs assessment, you'll get this little magnifying glass next to it, so you'd be able to see, if you had multiple occurrences, you'd be able to see the whole trend, see all the occurrences all at once, so you can see, make sure the patient's trending correctly. But for ones that are not flagged as being a vital signs assessment, you don't get that little magnifying glass. Now moving on to my operative record. This is where the bulk of the documentation will take place. So you can see here, I have just everything set up to condense. So if I wanted to, I can again click my plus to expand them all, see all the fields, or I can do them individually as I get to there. I'm going to actually just have them all expanded. That way I can then minimize them as I go through. So with your record, when you're creating the option set, you can really customize it to your needs. So you can have it set up to be the fields in the order that you'd be documenting them, or have them appear in what's most comfortable for your staff. So what I did when I created my option set, I think I tried to group things together for the operative section based upon when they might occur. So you'll see in here with my document my case times will look a little bit different than in my preoperative section, where pre-op I had them just all in one area, but in my operative section I actually had them separated out so that way they're grouped with other fields that would likely be documented at the same time. So I'll get to that in a second. So my first section, I'm under my general data. Just my actual operation date and actual operation time and the room it's taking place in. Just so you know, when you print off a copy of your schedule or you're on the big board or work list for that matter, this actual operation date and time and room is what's being referenced by that report and the and the big board. So if I change the time, say from 1450 to 1300, that would change it on that printed schedule. All right, so next up we have at the top of our screen, our anesthesia type. So you have options with this field, as well as the ASA classification. You can have it available to be controlled by either the operative section or the anesthesia section of the record. So if you have your anesthesiologist documenting and they're in the anesthesia section, you can set it up so they have control over these fields. But if they're not documenting in that section, you can set it up so the operative section has control of the fields, and they can just quickly go through and check up what anesthesia type was used and what the ASA classification was. That designation is set up within the OR customer-defined parameters. And the anesthesia type, that would actually default in from an appointment. So if on the appointment you define what the anesthesia type you thought it was going to be, that would come in and be populated. But when I booked the appointment, I didn't specify the anesthesia type because we didn't know at the time. Now, what's the ASA classification? And these are all lookups to dictionaries that you control. So if there's other anesthesia types or classifications, or you want to make a change, you can certainly go ahead and do so. The biggest thing I see with the anesthesia type is because right now you can only select one type of anesthesia. You can't say, I use the local and the IV sedation. You only choose one or the other. So what I've seen more often now is sites will go ahead and create the combined anesthesia types. So here we have the general and local as an option. So I can't click general and local here, so I have the separate option of the general/local. So if you have anything that you do combined, you can certainly create that option. Next up is the case type. Was this a planned surgery? Was it emergency, or is it urgent? So anything that comes from being booked as an appointment will default as being a planned case, where anything that's created using the new case function on the nurse desktop will default as being an emergency case. So you can always change it on the fly. So maybe it starts planned, now it's emergency, or now it's urgent, or vice versa. Maybe it was created using the new case, but it was actually planned surgery. So you have that flexibility to change the case type. Pre-op diagnosis. Pretty much the reason why the patient's coming in. So here, if we can pull in the reason for a visit from the account, from the appointment, if there was one entered in. So I didn't enter anything in. Let me just enter something in. So then that was the same, the pre-op diagnosis was the same as the reason for a visit. You'd be able to just pull in that into the record. And then the physician will default in from the appointment as well. So if you have the field available, you can certainly go ahead and change that. So if the physician does change, you can do that here. And once you're done with the section, you can click the button on the left-hand side just to minimize that section. So when I created this option set, I just kind of put the general data, things that aren't going to be really changed or things that just be done right away, right at the top. So that way I can then just minimize it right off the bat when I'm done. All right, so the next section we have the ones where I have preparation, devices, equipment. Again, I grouped the fields together in this area to be things I think would probably take place that would be documented right around the same time. So I figured so here you see I have my into OR time listed first. So what time the patient actually go into the operating room. It'll default the date of the record. In the next field, as you noticed probably with the pre-op area, each case time you can enter in a delay reason. So if there was a delay for the patient going into the OR, so maybe you thought they're planning on going in at 8 o'clock, but they didn't go in until 9:15, you can certainly go ahead and add a delay reason. So this look up into the OR delay reason dictionary. So it's something that you would be able to enter in all the reasons of why a case might be delayed. So maybe something, maybe an issue with the equipment not being available, something was broken in the room, the surgeon here, the doctor was late, anesthesiologist was late, staff wasn't available, whatever the reason may be, you can create those delay reasons, and then if there is a delay, document in the record, then you can track and trend cases that are delayed. So if doctor's always saying, oh, why is everything always running slow? We're always behind. If you have the delay reasons in there, you can run reports to find out why the cases are why they're behind. And in this case, I'm going to say the doctor's late, so then you can point the finger back to them and say, well, your cases are running late because you're always late, or whatever the reason may be. And then if there was a delay, how long was it? So in this case, I thought the patient was going to go into the OR at 8 o'clock, but they didn't go in until 9:15, so I put a delay minutes of 75 minutes. All right. Next we have is our preparation screen. This is actually a customer-defined screen that you would create, and we would just attach it to the parameters for you. So this is where we just document the patient preparation. Again, this is a customer-defined screen, so you can add in as much information as you need to, anything that you need to document. And I don't have the appropriate site for this. Well, I just document that so I get rid of the red eye. Next we have our positions and devices. Again, these are fields that can actually be set up to default into the record based upon the procedure being performed. So it would come in from the procedure dictionary. So if you have defaults, or if you know the patient's always going in certain positions, you can go ahead and enter that in. Likewise with the devices, you can enter in what devices are being used to hold the patient in place. And with each one, you do have the ability to document comments associated with each device. So if there are settings with the devices, you can certainly go ahead and enter those in as a comment. And likewise with the positioning too. There are ability to enter comments associated with the position. Equipment. The equipment will actually default in from the appointment. So if you had equipment that was conflict checked specifically for that case, it'll default in, as you can see here, my OR BOV3, that defaulted in from my appointment. Then here if I did actually use it, I just check it off to say I did use it. Then with that, there's also a customer-defined screen I had attached to the equipment within the resource schedule dictionary. So on here, I can document certain things, some settings on this of the equipment. So if there's anything you need to document when using the equipment, you can certainly create a customer-defined screen to get all those information. So let me just save that. And I see it changed to the blue eye. If you actually use additional equipment, you can do a lookup into essentially the resource schedule dictionary to find the equipment find the resources that have been flagged as being OR equipment. Well, if I had anything on my preference card, I'd be able to select that from here, but I don't have anything to find since that's already been pulled in. So you document as many pieces of equipment as you actually used. All right, catheter drain screen. If the patient had a catheter, we do have the ability to have a customer-defined screen defined in the parameters that would default as being available when you document the catheter strains. So I just save that. Just like our pre-op section, the operative section in each section of the record has the ability to have invasive procedures. Then next is we have my case time of procedure start. So what time did we actually go start the procedure? So the patient went into the room at 9:15, so say 9:25, but they actually started the procedure. So in these case time headers, they're actually defined in the OR customer-defined time headers routine. So the operative section, you can have up to 10 case time headers available. And then the other sections, I believe it's all, I think aside from phase 2 and anesthesia, they can have 4 case time headers in each of the other sections. So pre-op, holding, and phase 1 would have 4, can have up to 4. So in ours, we just have the basics of procedure in room, procedure start, end, and whatnot. So let me just save this. It's also a good idea to save on a regular basis, just in case something ever happens, you lose connectivity or someone preempts you or whatnot. As long as you save, you won't lose documentation. And also, too, if you have your big board set up to reflect things like your case times or destinations, that won't display on the big board until you actually save. So it's a good idea, even just from that standpoint, to save on a regular basis. Next, we have our counts area. So this was recently enhanced. So that way, previously you could have up to only 4 different count events. Now it's up to you how many count events that you need. So the only 2 that are hard-coded for us are the initial and final count. All the others are defined by you. So do you want do you want them just to be named second count, third count? Do you want to have a count that's called surgeon requested or whatnot? You can certainly go ahead and do so. Just to go through the documentation of this. First up we have is our procedures. So what procedure is this count for? So if you had multiple procedures, you can have it set up to, they'll default to all the procedures at first. But then you also separate out the counts, like at 2 in a minute, so you can have counts that are unique to the other procedures if you were doing multiple. All right, so the first one with the initial count, we can flag it if we're not doing the counts. We can say count not needed. So maybe depending on the case, then you can flag it as you don't need to do the counts. And then you can enter in a note as to why it's not needed. Let me just put that in there just so I can show you. So I put a note in there, now just put a little check mark to say there's data behind that note. All right. Well, I'm going to uncheck that, say we actually are going to do the counts. So the count items, these are going to default in based upon the settings within your facility data dictionary. So if we're, maybe in this case, we don't need to count those. So I'm just going to uncheck them. So maybe we're just doing blades, sponges, and needles this time. Again, you can go ahead and enter any notes about that specific count. And then who counted. Who performed the count. So I can check off as many people as I need to. You also, if the lookup will go to first the OR staff dictionary, so it'll filter that out. But if you wanted to expand it out, you can select users to look up to the MIS user dictionary. Excuse me. Then next we have our second count. Now here's where you have the document saying whether or not the count was correct, incorrect, whether we didn't need to do the count at the time or it's not applicable. And if it's incorrect, or we can enter in a reason why it's incorrect. I'm just going to save this. And then also when we did that second count, who did that count again? Is it the same people as before? Or was it other people? Now maybe in this case we didn't need to do we weren't doing the third count, so we can just flag it as being to remove. So I'm going to say it's going to remove the selected count type. And now that count type is gone. At the bottom, you do have the ability to add count types and items. So maybe in this case, the entry is not there that I wanted, so I'm just going to go ahead and quickly build my count type. And create one search and request. All right. So let's create that and say our default with initial, second, final, and whatnot. So you can have ones where, in this case, search and requested. So maybe on the fly, the search and request, let's perform a count right now. Actually, it'll default into where the slot below where you have highlighted. So up here, I had the procedure highlighted, not the second count. So added it right after the initial. So now, since I was highlighting my second count, when I added the search and requested, put it just below that. Just as you can add the count types, you can choose to add the individual count items. So maybe there's something that defaulted in or that didn't default in, but now the case changed a bit, so now you want to add the different item that you want to count. You can certainly do a lookup into the count item. So I'll give you all the options from the items that have been added to the facility data dictionary. I'm actually going to uncheck that. So I'm actually going to leave the final counts blank for now. So that way when we go into some of the other functions, when I go to enter in the completed by information, we can see what happens when we don't complete our counts. At the top, I have my accounts for my knee arthroscopy. If there are other procedures that I performed on the case, I can go ahead and certainly add them in. And it would apply that counts to that procedure as well. So I'm just going to remove that one. So I just click that drop down and unchecked it. But if we did have multiple procedures, you can completely separate out the counts. So I have one count for the knee arthroscopy, maybe I'm doing also a total knee replacement, so arthroscopy on the right knee replacement on the left knee, or whatnot. I can then have counts specific to the knee replacements that are completely separated out from the arthroscopy. So I'm just going to actually leave that there for the moment, because that's going to come into play when we go in to document our procedures. Nice little trick in there, but that relates to the counts. So next we have at the bottom our counts. We can flag it as, we can say surgeon given counts to surgeon notified. So you actually control the labeling of this field. So if you don't want to say surgeon given, you can just say surgeon notified or whatever you want. You can certainly do that. And say yes, that you did. Was there an x-ray taken of the patient? Yes or no? Did you scan the patient, like if you had like an RFID tags on something, we can scan them, make sure nothing's missing. Or you just flag as being not applicable. Again, there's nursing diagnosis screens. This is the next section. Let me minimize this first for now. You can set those up to default in from the facility data dictionary. Actually, no, sorry, the default will come from the procedure dictionary. The facility data is where you first actually define them as the CDSs as being nursing diagnosis screens. The operative section, you have the ability to document medications, intakes, outputs, and blood products, just as you could in the pre-op. Again, the medications and intakes, that will be a topic for tomorrow with the pharmacy integration. We already talked about the outputs and the blood products, so I'll skip that for now. Just like the pre-op section, we have the ability to document pre-text notes. I'm going to pull in my canned text, say just family notified of status at 10:15. So whatever you want in the canned text or free text, you can certainly do that. All right. Next, we have our staff information. So pretty much who's in the room. So was there an assisting surgeon, yes or no? If there was an assisting booked on the appointment, they would have defaulted in. So if there was someone assisting them, this is to look up into the provider dictionary. You can just go ahead and check off who the assisting surgeon was, if there was one, or as many as there were multiples. Anesthesiologist, this would default in from the appointment if there was one defined. So who was the anesthesiologist of the case? Were there additional anesthesiologists, yes or no? If there were, then you could again document who the additional ones were. Next is assisting/CRNA. This will look up into the OR staff dictionary. So the first four staff fields you see here, those labels are hard-coded, so you can't change those. However, the bottom 6, these are coming from the OR customer-defined staff headers, and these are just free text headers that you would tell us what you want entered in, so different various staff members that would be working. So here we have, for example, we have circulator, scrub, tech, or radiology tech, other staff, student staff, vendor staff. So whatever meets your needs can certainly do that. So as you notice, as I add the staff in, there's a little clipboard that shows next to it with a little clock icon. If you click on that, this will launch you into a screen where I can enter the times. So maybe the circulator changed throughout the case. Maybe they were relieved for a break. You can enter in the times where they were actually in the room. So for Deborah, I can go ahead and say they were at the circulator from, and then maybe they were relieved at 9:45, or I'll do 10. Then you can enter a free text or comment about the times. And then that'll put a little check mark there. One thing you want to make sure of, if you do enter in the times, if you enter a from time on the staff, before you can verify the record, you'll be required to enter a through time. If you leave these fields blank, the system will just assume that the staff was there for the entire duration of the procedure. Also, with these fields, you do have the ability to free text people into them. So as you can see, the lookup goes to the OR staff dictionary or the MIS user dictionary. But there may be times where people in the room, they're not actually built in the staff dictionary or the user dictionary. So maybe you have a student that's in there observing, or your vendors are in the room. So I know when I go on site, there are times I go into the OR to observe documentation. So you'll be able to document who was actually in the room. So that way, I'm flagged as being that I was in the room as a vendor. So that way, if there's ever a need to get in contact with someone that was in the room, you know who was there. So maybe there's an infectious disease or something, want to tell them, you can document that. The one thing you want to make sure is when you're free texting them in, you free text them in consistently the same way. So either all uppercase or the mixed case. Don't do a combination of both, because there's some reports that we run where you can see the staff that was in the room. So even though looking at this here, we know it's the same person, but since they're entered in differently, one with all uppercase and the other one with lowercase, they're not going to be combined on the report. So just make sure if you do free text, so you consistently enter it in the same way. Actually, going back to the counts for a quick second. Once it saves. So if we had documented our staff first before we did our counts, so I just jumped back to the count screen for a quick second. There'll be another option for the lookup. So instead of like filtering through the whole OR staff dictionary or the user dictionary, since I already documented my staff members, the staff fields, I'll default the lookup for the counted by as being the staff that has already been documented in the record. It's a great time saver. So if you document your staff before you do your counts, saves a lot of time with documenting there. All right. So next we have is our specimens and cultures. So these are actually just free text fields. You can pull canned text into them, where you can document what the specimen that you took and what the cultures were. They don't really go anywhere. They just kind of sit here within the record. So just big free text area. All right, so next we have, underneath our post-op data header, we have our dressing set up as a field. So this dressing defaulted in because it was already built on the preference card. So if we do have the dressings field, we can pull that in here, say that we did use it. You can also, if you didn't want to use this separate field for the dressings, you can also document them as being items. So you have a choice of either way. But this, if I do look up here, you'll have options to see the items are flagged as being dressings on the preference card. Or if you do select all, this will do a lookup into the inventory items dictionary to see all items that are flagged as being a dressing. But that's blank, so I think I only have one built in there, and it's already been added to the record. All right. Next we have is our explants field. So if you took something out of the patient, you can document what that was. So if you're actually utilizing, there's an enhancement for the implantable devices where you can send it over. There's a central MRI routine where it sends over whatever was implanted in the patient. We have the ability to do a lookup into the implantable devices to say, oh, we actually took this one out if the patient has been there before. This patient doesn't have any current implants, so our lookup is going to be blank at the moment. But we do have the ability to free text in, so what did we take out of the patient? Who took the implant out? If we know the information, of the explant, what was the manufacturer, what quantity that you took out, do you have the date that it was put in? So then you also have our lot number, serial number, catalog number, batch number, and whatnot. So if you know that information, you can certainly free text that in. But none of these are required fields, just because you don't necessarily, not always going to have that information. Next, the post-op diagnosis. So it's just another free text field. So you have the option on the bottom of the screen to say, get pre-op diagnosis, and it'll pull in whatever is documented as the pre-op diagnosis. So if it's the same, you can certainly go ahead and do that. Nice time saver. What I have seen in the past is a lot of places, to save time, users would just document same on the post-op diagnosis to indicate that it's the same as the pre-op diagnosis. However, that's not the best thing to do, since you're just looking at this field alone. You're saying same. Same as what? So instead, the better option is, instead of typing same to indicate it's the same as the pre-op, just hit the Get from Pre-op Diagnosis button. One, it's also a time saver and makes your documentation more accurate. Next is the actual procedures. So this is where we can document what procedure did we actually perform. So this is going to default in our proposed procedure from our appointment. However, at the bottom of the screen, you may notice there's a new button called Get Counted Procedures. So previously when I did my counts, I had added an additional procedure. So instead of going through and doing a lookup here to, what did I press? To re-identify the procedure, which this list can get quite long to sort through. You can instead at the bottom hit Get Counted Procedures, and that will pull in the procedures that have not yet been defaulted onto the actual procedure screen. So remember before I added the total knee replacement in addition to the knee arthroscopy. Just a nice time saver to pull that in. I'm actually going to remove that for now. So once we document our actual procedure, we do have the ability to modify the description. You just want to be careful with modifying this description. You don't want to change it so much so that it's actually a completely different procedure. If it's a different procedure, you should change the mnemonic. So just as an extreme example, I wouldn't want to document this as appendectomy. So wouldn't want to change that procedure description. That's a completely different procedure. But the issue is if I do modify the procedure description, that looks all fine on the surface. But however, all of our charges, reporting, statistics, pretty much everything, all looks to the mnemonic of the procedure that's been chosen. So in the background, it's still that total knee arthroscopy, but modified it to be the description to be appendectomy. So if it's something that's completely changing the actual procedure performing, it's better to don't modify that description, but instead choose the actual appropriate mnemonic. All right, so let me close out of this for a second. There we go. All right. So after we choose the procedure defaults in, if that's the correct procedure, next we have is the primary or secondary. If there's only one procedure on here, it's going to default as being the primary. But as we go through and add additional procedures, they'll all default as being secondary procedures. You can always change this on the fly if you need to. However, since I only have one procedure, I'm not going to be able to, I don't think I'll be able to save that. Yes, if I try to save it, it says no primary procedures exist. So there has to be at least one primary procedure. What was the severity of the procedure? This defaults in from the appointment. But if the severity changed, so maybe the patient has other medical conditions, that might change it from a minor procedure to a major procedure or a major to minor. You can certainly change that on the fly. Next we have is where did the procedure take place? Is it the right, in this case, is it the right knee, left knee? Do I do arthroscopies on both knees? Or if it's, say if it's like an appendectomy, you don't have a right or a left, it'd just be not applicable. Wound cap class, this defaults in from the procedure dictionary. And these are hard-coded procedures of the wound classification: clean, contaminated, dirty, infected, not applicable. And you can also set this field up to be required in order to verify the case. And that's also set up within the procedure dictionary. All right, surgeon who actually performed this procedure. this defaults in from our appointment. But if for whatever reason, maybe the surgeon didn't actually perform the procedure today, maybe someone filled in, you can always certainly change that on the fly. The most important thing is to document what actually happened accurately. All right. So next fields we have is our procedure start, procedure end times. So these would be used if you're having, if there are multiple procedures being performed in the case, where you can specify what time each procedure started and ended. Now, if there was only one procedure being performed, you can leave these blank just because the system would then look to the case times on the main screens for the procedure start, procedure end times. But if you did have, all right, so let me, I'm going to pull that one back in for a second. So maybe the knee arthroscopy, left. Let's say maybe the knee arthroscopy, we did that from 9 o'clock to 9:30. And then the knee replacement, we did that separately at a different time, so at 9:30 to, say, 11:30. It took 2 hours. So when there are multiple procedures, it's definitely a good idea to put the individual procedure times on this screen. Mainly because it comes into play with our statistics, our monthly statistics reports. So if there are multiple procedures and these times are documented, these times that are documented on this screen will be referenced on those the statistics reports. If I left these blank and there were multiple procedures, what would happen is when I print the statistics reports, all the time and the credit will go to the first listed actual primary procedure. So it all go to this total knee arthroscopy. And on the report, the knee replacement, it wouldn't show as, it would show up on that report, but it wouldn't have any time credited for it on the statistics reports. So from that reason alone, it'll make those reports much more accurate by putting in the individual procedure start and end times if there are multiple procedures on the case. Likewise with our surgeon times, so maybe there are multiple procedures on the case and there are different surgeons performing. So maybe the surgeon wasn't there for the entire time for both procedures. So you can enter in the time that they were actually in the room. Or maybe even they came into the room after the patient did. Maybe they came in, the patient was in the room at 9 o'clock, maybe the surgeon didn't come in until 9:15. You can certainly enter in those times of when the surgeon was in the room. Again, if you leave these blank, the system assumes that they were there the entire time. And then you just have a little comment box so you can enter in anything about the case that you want to, or about the procedure of the surgeon. Now I documented my actual procedure. If I click the little magnifying glass, I get a little snapshot of what I just entered in. Okay, so what time did the procedure end? So we performed one procedure. What time did it end? we do 10:10, and the surgeon left 5 minutes later after they were done. And then next we have our out of OR time. What time did the patient actually leave the operating room? And again, with all our case times, you can enter in delay reason and delay minutes. All right. Next up we have is our transfer data. So what was the outcome of the procedure? Did we complete it? Was it canceled? And if it was canceled, what was the reason? So this is looking to the OR outcome dictionary. So if you don't have the appropriate options here, you can certainly go ahead and add them to that dictionary. I can just flag it as being completed. When they leave the OR, where are they going to? Hopefully they're going back to the PACU. And how are they getting there? And just like the other areas, who are you handing them off to? Who are you reporting them, giving them the report to? So next we have is our risks. There's actually a separate risks routine that's available on the OR main menu. And I believe this is also available in other sections of the record as well. But if the patient has any risks, you can certainly add them in. So the risk would be, look up to the OR risk dictionary. So maybe the patient has asthma, they have high blood pressure, anything that you would consider a risk, you can go ahead and enter that in. So the first one is to look up into the OR risk dictionary. Then down below is free text area. So if there's an appropriate one up top, then you can certainly free text it in. Then you have the ability to document the discovery date. So when the patient find out they've had hypertension, if they know that, you can enter that in. Those aren't required fields. And who found it. Was it by a physician, or it's by someone else? And the nice thing with the risks is it's not tied to the account number or the record. So when the patient comes back to the hospital for surgery, this hypertension risk will still be there. They can go ahead and see what those risks are. Next two fields, untoward events and complications. Each section of record has those fields and it's specific to that area. Untoward events, something that happens to the patient that's outside the normal care, but it needs to be documented. Whereas the complication, something that happens to the patient and it changes your entire plan of care. So these are both, just a look up into the first one's untoward events dictionary. I'm just going to select that they got a little burn, but you still proceeded with the procedure anyways. It didn't change your plan of care. Or if I choose a complication, so look up into the OR complication dictionary. And it's all the ones that we have built in this particular ring. So if there weren't any complications or untoward events, you can leave those blank. And one thing you want to note is I don't believe these actually print on the surgical record, and I don't believe they are sent to the EMR. So it just kind of stays within OR. Then we do have a report where you can run to see if any complications or untoward events were documented on patients, and then actually go to the record to see what that is. So it's something that just doesn't really get broadcast out. You have to actually dig a little bit for the information within the OR. Excuse me. And then next we have the completed date and time. So maybe we're done with our documentation within the operative section of the record. We can certainly enter in when we actually completed it. And this will go through and check to make sure we're not missing any required fields. So since I started my counts, I have to finish my counts. So I'm being warned that I am missing the final count. So this will tell me if there's anything required that is missing. Then I can go back and finish my counts, say, oh, here's my final count, it's correct. I'm actually going to remove this one. It's not letting me remove for some reason. Yeah, let's look into that, why it's not letting me remove that. I must have be referenced somewhere else. Now if I go through and enter my date and the time again, go through, do that check, and now I'm at the requirement. So I've said I completed my documentation at 14:25. So that's the main portion of the operative section of the surgical record. Should also point out at the bottom of the screen, we do have the case review button. And what this will do, this will give a little snapshot of everything that's happened to the case. So give me information from each other section of the record so I could see what the pre-op meds were, phase 1, phase 2, if they were there. It's my intakes, any case times that have been documented, what the vital signs were across all of them, if there are any notes, what the procedures were, and if there were any items or implants. So just a nice little snapshot, what happened. I'm not going to go too much into these because these are topics for tomorrow, which is mainly I want to get information on here for charging. But I do want to point out a couple things with the implants first. So when documenting our implants, you do have the ability, if you have a barcode, you can scan them. So scan the device identifier if you're using that functionality, or if you have the UPN number in the system, you can scan that as well. So you just select scan used and scan the barcode, and the system would find the appropriate implant or even the items for that matter. So when you document, how many did you use? 1, 2, 3, whatever it may be. Did we waste anything? Maybe we opened something up, it fell on the floor, we opened it up, broke it, or whatever. We want to document that it was wasted. And then you have the option on both areas to say, do you want to charge for the implant or the item or not? when you're documenting implants, you have the ability to document the manufacturer, who put the implant in, as well as the lot number, serial number, catalog number, size, and whatnot. Any bit of information that you have about the implant, you can go ahead and enter that in. But since this case, which is in the arthroscopy, we didn't put any implants in, I'm going to remove that. Just want to point out that functionality there. On our implant screen, we just document what was actually used. So here we can go a couple options. We can individually select the items that were used from each individual inventory. Or again, if you have the scanning functionality, if you have the barcodes, UPNs built in the system, you can select scan used or scan wasted and pull that in. Or the other option is get from preference card. Expand, condense. I think we talked about that yesterday with preference cards. So just quickly pull in what was actually on the preference card. And here it'll show me there are two items that are actually set up to actually generate a charge. The other ones are no and grayed out, so I know just by looking at this that this item is not set up to charge at all. I just want to pull that information in just to get some charges on there, so when you go over to the billing maintenance desktop, there's actually something there. The next tab is miscellaneous charges. So we have the ability to randomly enter in billing codes. So if there's a way, there's something needed to charge the patient, but there isn't a standard way, such as your case times, your time charge rules, items, implants, medications, you do have the ability just to randomly add a barcode to, a billing code to the record. One scenario that I remember being one of my sites, they charged a patient for oxygen, but wasn't really an item, so they couldn't bill that as an item, and something that it gets used indefinitely until the tank runs out or whatever it is. But they just want to charge the patient, so the best way for them was just to add a miscellaneous charge for that oxygen charge that they were giving the patient oxygen. This is just actually a lookup into the BAR procedure code dictionary. So this will give you pretty much everything. You can see every billing code in the system. And here you can enter in what the cost was, if you know the cost of whatever it was. It's not required. And the charge will default in from the BAR procedure dictionary. And you may or may not be able to change the charge amount. So depending on how that billing code is set up, it's either you might be able to edit it or not. And then how many times do you want to apply that charge? 1, 2, 10? So you can add in as many as you need to if you want to use miscellaneous charges. All right. So next is the phase 1 and phase 2 section. So once the patient leaves the operating room, this is sections for different phases of PACU. So I'm not going to go too much into these because, as you can see, we explain this all out. The fields are pretty much the same as the other two sections, except they're specific to the patient being in phase 1, so when they're in PACU. So I'm just going to enter something in. If I go into phase 2, it's going to look again very much the same, except again specific to that area. So you have your medications intakes, destinations, staffing, times, nursing diagnosis screen, as well as any assessments that you want to enter in. And also anesthesia, they have their own section of the record as well. And this is specific to anesthesia. So here we have the times that anesthesia was administered, start and end times. A lot of times I actually see these case times mixed into the operative section of the record, mainly because a lot of the section of the records, the anesthesia section is not really widely used. So instead of jumping back and forth between sections of the record, just mix the case times into the operative section. And then we flag it as being as such anesthesia times and to generate the charges. Then here we have fields that are specific to anesthesia, the agents that were used, any notes. We can select off the type of monitors we use, the respirations, the circuit that we use as well, if there are any complications. So these are all dictionaries that are specific in the anesthesia dictionaries within OR, so you control all the fields that appear here as well as the order that they appear in. So let me save something. So that's the documentation portion. That's the majority of it. Like I said, tomorrow when you go over the integration with OR materials management, pharmacy, integration with PCS, so that's why I didn't go over those today. But I did want to point out, as you saw that particular record, there's a lot available to document. So there might be some cases where you need a shorter record or you don't need to have as many areas to document in. So I know the biggest one that we see is your cataract cases. They're really short, not as much documentation as, say, a knee replacement or knee arthroscopy or whatever. So we created an option set specific for those procedures. So you can see on the right-hand side, pre-op holding, phase 1, phase 2, anesthesia, those are all grayed out just because the option set only has access to the operative section. When I go into the record, you'll notice it's going to look a little bit different than the one we just went into. In this one, I have my case times grouped together all in one section, as opposed to spread out throughout the record. And I don't have all my sections expanded. I just have a couple of key sections expanded right off the bat that I know I'm going to be documenting in. So I don't have as many fields listed. I forgot. I removed some customer-defined screens. What else did I remove? There's a couple of fields that I removed, but I want to make it a little bit shorter for the cataract, the eye cases. So that's a nice thing. So depending on what procedure is being performed, would determine exactly what you need to document, and you can customize and tailor the record layout to those cases. All right, so that is documentation. I checked to see, I don't see any questions. Okay, so moving on from documentation, the next desktop we'll talk about is the billing maintenance desktop. Actually, before that, I meant to go into the option set dictionary just to show you some of the options that you have when building your option sets. So as I mentioned before, the access option set, this determines the layout of the record. So what fields are available to document in the order that they appear in. So here I already have some that have been built. I have a full option set, which I think has pretty much every field available in it. But then I have other ones. I have my ophthalmology one for my shorter, my cataract cases. So you can see here I only have my operative record there. I don't have any pre-op, post-op, or whatnot. So when you're building your option sets, you have the ability to flag enable the assessments for that, enable the record as a whole. So maybe you want something that only has access to just the assessments or just the items implants. So you can say no to enable that they can't get into the main record section. Likewise, with you can say whether or not you want the implants and the item screens available as well. So once we get down to our sections, this is where we can group our fields together. So this first section is just the label. So as you saw before when I was in there, I had it labeled as times. Maybe I want to label it differently. So you can label this however you want to, since it's just a free text area. Then you can also flag the section as being view only. So maybe you don't want to give people, you don't want people to have the ability to change the section, so you can flag as being view only. So someone that's just reviewing, somebody you don't want to have the ability to document, you can flag them as being view only. So you can do that as sections, as a individually sections. So maybe just the case times you want to say it's view only, or you could do the record as a whole. You'd say the operative record is view only. So maybe if you have staff that exclusively work in pre-op or PACU, you can flag the operative record as being view only for them, so they could see what happened while the patient was in the operating room, but not actually be able to make any changes. So depending on your role, would determine whether or not you want to flag them as being view only or not. And when you're adding your data elements, these are their individual fields. This will determine the order of how they appear. And anything that appears in this lookup tells me I haven't added the fields yet into the record. Okay, so when I set this one up, I removed the counts information, catheters, CDSs. So if I wanted to add more times, so we have 5 case times, I can certainly add that in. Now if I go to a lookup, operative case time 5 is no longer available in there. So now I know it's already been added. So that ensures you can only add a field once per section. If I go to my full one that I already have created, I can see that this one has much more available. So I have my X's anesthesia, holding room operative, phase 1, phase 2, and pre-op. So really customize it to your needs. And when you're building your option sets, when you create a new one, I just typed in new as the mnemonic. You don't have to do that, but you can copy from an existing one. So if you know that the option set's going to be very similar to what you're already using, you can certainly copy from there and just make your minor modifications. There's a nice just a nice time saver. So maybe this one, we don't want to have the anesthesia or phase 2 sections. We're only using pre-op, operative, and phase 1. You can do something like that. So it's a nice quick time saver when you're doing that. And once you have your option sets built, you have everything in the order that you want to, you would attach them to your access. So I know I'm in the full access group. There's the option sets tab, and this would determine which option set is actually used. So our default option set is full. So I get that full big option set with all the record sections. However, down below, I have an option set for my procedure group, my ophthalmology procedure groups. So if my procedure being performed belongs to the ophthalmology group, I'm going to use that truncated option set that has just the operative section on the record. So you can have different option sets for each procedure. You can do procedure group or individual procedure types. So maybe, I don't know what groups I have built in here, so I'm just going to do a lookup. Maybe I want to have a specific option set be used for my colonoscopy procedures. You can narrow it down that specific to each. If you want to do each procedure, you can have a different option set if you really wanted to. But if you leave these the fields blank here for your procedure group and your procedures, and you only have your default option set defined, that default option set is one that will be used on all your cases. So it's nice functionality. You're flexible, so you can determine exactly what you want to have available and what you need available for documentation. All right. Next up is the billing maintenance desktop. This is where we can go ahead and review the record before we complete the case. So before we verify. So before reviewing up here, I'm just going to go down a couple options down the bottom. So first one, we can change the date. So if we want to see cases from a specific date range, we can certainly go ahead and do that. So the date range will default in from your OR Access Dictionary. At the top, you'll notice that I'm seeing cases from all locations. And so you can restrict what cases display based upon the location they take place in within your Access Dictionary. But you can also just change it, so you can say, hit change location. Right now I'm seeing all locations. If say you have multiple units, you have an endo unit and a main OR unit, you can set that up so maybe I want to see a case that take place in my endo area. So here I have one that's within endo. But I want to see all because I'm not sure what location the case was that I was just working in, so. And then the add case button, I believe we talked about it earlier when Janice was going over the nurse desktop. This will simply just add a case that doesn't fall in the date range selection they have here. I don't think I've created a case for myself. Of course, I didn't create one for myself, but you'll be able to add a single case to this list. But getting back to the purpose of this desktop, it's a great tool for you to review your documentation and ensure your charges are in order. So you're going to use this to review the charges before you complete the record, verifying it. So at the top you have a patient list. You can see the date, the name, the first primary procedure count, the status of the case, which is verified, unverified, deferred, which I'll talk about each status in a minute, as well as the surgeon. Also on the right-hand side, you can toggle between which case do you want to see. Right now, do I want to see just my unverified cases, deferred or verified, or all? So right now, it's my access set to default is all. So on here, once I have my case selected, highlighted, I can see on my right-hand side my record status. So I can see my pre-op is complete, and this actually references the completed by fields and the completed date fields to say those fields are populated, so this status is now showing my documentation pre-op is they're complete, they're done with it. Hold room says no activity because nothing's been documented in that section, so either I know that section's not being used or I can tell that they haven't started their documentation yet. And the last status is for my phase 1 saying in progress. That means documentation has been entered, but they didn't say that they're completed their documentation. So I can know to not verify the record until that status changes to complete so that they're done with their documentation. So just to show you, I'm just going to enter in and now that status of the phase 1 section saying complete, they're done with their documentation. All right, so now that we know everyone's done, let me flag anesthesia as being complete as well. So now that I know, I can see my status, everyone says they're done with their documentation. I know it's a good time I can go ahead and review to make sure the charges are correct. So everyone's done with their documentation. This is what should be charged. So on here I can see my descriptions. So I can see what my charges are for my preoperative time, for the operative time charges, if there's anything for phase 1, phase 2, or anesthesia time. I can also get an idea of how much I'm charging for my items. So I think I had 2 items that are charging, so it's only $5. As well, if there are any charges for my implants, I charge for using equipment, if there are charges associated to the procedure itself, as well as my miscellaneous charges. So I remember before I added a miscellaneous charge, I think I had like $470. Now there's also a $2,000 charge that's there. So that's because in my facility data dictionary, we have a billing code added to the auto bill prompt, which just simply adds that billing code to every single record. So that's something you can use if you want to add it or not. It's good if I've seen it being used to capture statistics that are sent to BAR and ultimately to the General Ledger Department. So I've seen it as like, it doesn't actually generate a charge, but it's just one of those codes that just gets sent to BAR and they can run statistical reports off of it based on the number of cases that was performed within OR. And this description, that's nice and all. It gives you an idea of what you're charging, gives you an overall snapshot. However, you want more detail about the individual billing codes. you have a couple options. You have review charges. This is really broken out by date. And then here I can see what I'm charging for my makeup for my individual areas. So here are my billing codes, my items, what I'm charging. Let me just nice little quick way to get a nice snapshot about what was charging. Okay. So I just wanted to correct something in one of the dictionaries. And I noticed there wasn't any anesthesia charges. There we go. So I make a change in the dictionary so I can generate charges for anesthesia time. So if I notice that something looks off, like, oh, our supplies don't look right, our implants aren't there, I can go into the record and make the change. So that's a nice thing on the right-hand side. Instead of going back to the nurse desktop to go into the record to do the documentation, I can just quickly jump into any section of the record from the billing maintenance desktop to make the appropriate changes. Or to simply just review the record. So maybe I know there should be certain items documented. I can go ahead and like, oh, that's not there, why? If you don't want to use that review charges button, you can certainly go ahead and print the preliminary billing list. This will give you the same information, but just in a report format. So this will show me what will be sent to BAR when I do complete the record. You can certainly print this off if you wanted to, instead of printing it to preview. And so before getting into verifying and whatnot, there are a couple options on the right-hand side. So I know Jan's talked about the buttons on the nurse desktop. Go to PCS, enter orders, go to the open chart routine. But we do have a couple other options here, the switch account being one. So if the documentation of the record was created on the incorrect account, we have the ability to use the switch account routine to move it to the appropriate account. So this record's on the V3815. I can select switch account. I can see, oh, it's actually, there's an account we should have used that was already, patient was admitted under. I can go ahead and select that, and it will change the account number on there, move all the documentation over to the appropriate account number. So now it's on that V3236 account. I actually want it back on the other one. But in order to switch the account on the record, the account you're switching to, it has to be an existing account number, and the account must be at least in a pre-registered status. It can't be in a scheduled status. That's not a valid account status for using the switch account routine here. So pre-registered, registered, admitted, discharged, departed, those are all valid. account status is, just the SCH status is not. Reports under here, we have the ability to run certain reports. So we can print a copy of the surgical record. And when we do that, we can determine what section of the record do we want to see. The default is selecting them all. So now here's a printed copy of my record, pretty much everything that's entered into the system. So once we do verify / complete the record, a copy of this report can be sent to two places. It can be sent to the EMR underneath the surgery complete report, as well as if you're using the electronic chart in MRI, we can send a copy of that record to the electronic chart as well. And that takes place, the EMR one takes place when we verify, and then the e-chart takes place when we verify, but there are also other settings within MRI that determines when it actually pulls that data over. So it's eligible to go over once we verify. Once we do print off a copy of the record, you do get prompted to print the preliminary billing list if you want to as well. So you also, from here, you print the preliminary billing list for multiple cases. So before when I hit print the preliminary billing list, it was just for the one case I'd highlight, but if I want to see everything for all these days, I can certainly do that. Likewise, if I want to do the billing list, I can do that there as well. So you may have noticed at the bottom, the billing list report button, that's been grayed out. That will become available once we actually verify or defer the record. So the preliminary billing shows you what will be sent over to BAR once we verify, whereas the billing list shows you what was sent to BAR when we verify. All right. So the last thing that we have here is buttons right in the middle: verify, defer, and unverify. So what this will do is we'll essentially complete the record. So verifying indicates to the system that the case was completed, we performed the procedure, documentation's done, and that will do a number of things. One, it'll send charges to BAR. It'll make the record available in certain reports that it needs to be verified under. Send a copy of the final record to the EMR, as well as it also just locks down the record so no one can make changes to it anymore. So I'm just going to verify and just kind of go through, and I can enter a comment about verifying the record if I wanted to. And now that record, you see the status changed to be verified. Now if I go into try to make any changes saying case is verified, operative record will be view only. So I can just go in and I can't make any changes. I can see anything that's in there, but I just can't change anything. You know, you notice on the bottom, the billing list button is now available. So I'm going to run for the activity dates, the day the charges were sent to BAR. So since I verified it today, today would be the activity day. And here's everything that was sent to bar. Now, one thing, even though the case has been verified, you do have the ability to continue documenting assessments. So if you wanted to, say, a post-op follow-up with the patient, so maybe 2 weeks after surgery or a week after surgery, you can do a follow-up call and you can document assessment associated with that. So that way you have your documentation all the way from before the patient arrived with your preoperative interview, everything that happened within the hospital while the patient was in for surgery, as well as anything that happened afterwards. So you have it all in one place. Everything that's related to surgery is in that one area. Now, if I notice, come back maybe a couple days from now, review the record again, notice something's incorrect in my documentation. Since the status isn't verified, I'm not going to be able to make any changes to it. But we do have the ability to change that status back to an unverified status. I'll get this pop-up saying I can enter in a comment. It shows me what the current status is, when it was verified and by who, or when it was verified and by who. If I go back into my operative section, maybe that's just telling me the next case done I had documented, which is my into PACU time, is essentially before my out of OR time. So just tell me that's kind of out of order. So it's like you left the OR prior, or you went into PACU before you left the OR. I think I probably had that at 10:30 as well. So to avoid that one, I'm just going to so now I made my correction in my record. My charges are updated. I can go ahead and re-verify it. Now, one thing to just remember is that when you unverify the record, any charges that were sent to bar, especially the billing chart, the item implant charges, those will be pulled back from bar once you unverify, and then they'll be resent when you verify it again. So that's one thing you might want to, if you're unverifying a case from a couple of weeks ago, maybe the bill has already been posted in bar, you might want to notify your billing staff saying, hey, we're unverifying this case, so you might see some charges come through that might get rejected, or you might have to do something with on their end. All right. So the other status that we have, verifying tells the system, like, we completed the case, we performed the surgery. Whereas we have also the defer option, which this essentially does the same thing as verifying. It locks down the record, send any charges, potentially send charges to bar. We can't make any changes to it. But it tells the system that this is a case that we started, but we couldn't complete for some reason. So maybe the patient was in pre-op. No, you told the patient, don't eat anything after midnight. You asked the patient in the morning, like, do you eat anything? No, no, no. Then all of a sudden, getting ready to enter your preoperative documentation, and they come in and say, oh, well, I did actually have like a bagel or something this morning. Well, now you have to postpone the surgery, maybe later the day or another day. But you don't, in that case, you wouldn't want to necessarily use the same record. So you'd want to create a new record for them. But for the one that you already documented on, you'd want to defer, so that way it locks it down, document what happened up to the point where you decided to not perform surgery. And when you do that, you can enter a deferred reason. This will look up in deferred reason dictionary, so any reason why you defer a case. So maybe scenario where a patient ate something, maybe they're unstable. Here we have abnormal labs, maybe the patient wasn't responding well to anesthesia. Whatever the reason may be, you can create those reasons and then defer the record. Then you also have, depending on the situation, you may want to send the charges to bar, yes or no. So that's up to you. And also a comment. If there's any other additional information you want to enter in there that doesn't meet the need of the reason. Now I change the status of that case to deferred. The nice thing with that too is when you run the majority of the reports, you have the option to see the verified cases or the deferred cases. So you can include or exclude the deferred cases from your record. So if you're running statistics, you can run them specifically for your deferred cases, so you can see how many were deferred. Likewise, you can run them for just your verified cases, so the case that you actually did complete, or you can run them combined together. So it's definitely a good idea to use the deferred when the case doesn't actually happen, but you did have documentation in there. All right. I think that's all I have. So again, this desktop is a way to help confirm your charges are correct before you complete/verify your record. And I think that's all I actually have. So we went through the documentation within the record, as well as verifying and reviewing the billing maintenance desktop. Let me check to see if there are any questions. No. It doesn't look like there are any questions. So if that's the case, then I would just like to thank everyone for attending today. If you do come up with any questions after the fact, just let myself know or your OR specialist. I'm more than happy to help you with any questions that you may have. And, all right. Well, with that, I'll conclude today's session and just, again, thank everyone for attending. And if you're attending tomorrow, we start at the same time, I believe 9 Eastern for your integration, your other random topics. Thanks again, everybody.